So basically, it's the process of borrowing, right? It's not just at your just will and fancy of like, if there is funds, for grabs, you borrow. You have to. It's about borrowing for what you need, not borrowing just because you can. It's also about the terms and conditions of borrowing, right? That's what we've been starting to look at a lot, is that there's absolutely no transparency in Sri Lanka in terms of interest rates in terms of repayments, right? What are the agreements that we've entered into? And we've seen since 2005 onwards, right, there's been a huge shift from the conventional lenders to like commercial lenders, right? And our research has shown that that's a common practice in the corruption sphere, because there's less rigid agreements and less regulations and less reporting mechanisms, right? But high interest rates in terms of repayment. Conventional lenders also very often are project basis, right? You get loans for specific projects, for specific goals, not lumps of money where you can discretionary decide on how to spend it. So that's generally what debt integrity is, making sure that there's transparency. And again, the transparency in terms of how much money are we borrowing, how much debt do we have, right? We went through all of these years borrowing and borrowing and borrowing, and we saw these huge highways coming up and these huge infrastructure projects, but no one was focused on, because they didn't have access to information, or that wasn't publicly disclosed, where was this money coming from, right? And then everything came to a head in 2022. But that's essentially where we go with debt transparency and debt integrity. So there is, like you said, a massive overlap with the IMF governance diagnostic and the civil society governance diagnostic. I think what doesn't touch, very, very obviously doesn't get touched in the IMF one, is we also focus on civic space. Right, there's a recommendation that talks about, again, this enabling environment, right? You can't pushing for economic reform or anti-corruption reform in an environment that is devoid of any civic space, right? That is completely oppressive, right? Is redundant. It lacks any progress, right? For progress to be sustainable, right, there needs to be a proper civic space. It needs to be consultative, right? We're long gone are the days where laws are drafted behind closed doors, right? It's common practice now for it to be very consultative with civil society, with technical experts, right? So these are things that are covered also in the report that aren't in the IMF diagnostic.